Hi, boys and girls. This is Ms. Kathy. I'm so happy you've joined me today for another story just for you. Chapter 8, Secret Places. Sammy couldn't wait to tell the others at school about the bathroom incident. Mr. Chambers knows there's a bathroom, but he doesn't want anyone else to know, Sammy said enthusiastically. How do you know that? Maria asked. Because he slipped and almost said the bathroom was off the kitchen. Then he caught himself and said the only bathroom was upstairs. Wow, Chris said. I wonder what he's hiding in there. That's what we've got to find out, Sammy said. I'm going to call Mrs. Shue after school and fill her in. I'll see if she knows any other reasons why people would need secret rooms in their houses. After school that afternoon, Sammy dialed Mrs. Shue's number. He told her about his discovery. Then he asked for advice. I have a book that may be of some help, Mrs. Shue answered. Why don't you and the rest of the Shoebox Kids come over tomorrow after school, and we'll see what we can find out. The next afternoon, all the Shoebox Kids met at the Shue residence. While they were having another round of milk with Mrs. Shue's homemade cookies, Mrs. Shue brought a book to the table. Sammy almost choked when he saw it. That's the same book I got from the library, he exclaimed. It's all about secret rooms throughout history. I brought it home when I was working on my report about the Underground Railroad for school, but I haven't had time to read it yet. It does have a couple of chapters about hiding slaves, Mrs. Shue said, but what really interested me were the chapters about the early Christians who had to hide out. People hated them because they wanted to worship the one true God and not the many false gods of the Romans. So I bought the book a few years ago. I thought it might come in handy sometime, and now it has. Mrs. Shue turned to the table of contents. After scanning down the list of chapters, she turned to one. The kids looked at the title. It said, Christians in the Catacombs. Dee Dee wrinkled her face in confusion. What's that word? What? Catacombs, Mrs. Shue repeated slowly. The last part is pronounced combs, like combs to fix your hair. Catacombs were caves or tunnels that existed under the city of Rome. During the early years of the Christian church, Christians came under attack by the Roman citizens for having different beliefs. If you were discovered to be a Christian, you would be severely punished, even killed. She turned a page. There was a drawing of a tunnel with people praying in it. Here we go, Mrs. Shue said. She began to read the caption under the picture. Christians met in secret tunnels in order to worship God without being caught and to escape capture by the Roman authorities who might be looking for them. So these were reasons a secret room was needed almost 2,000 years ago. I'm sure glad we don't have to hide to worship God today, Willie said. That would be awful, Marie agreed. Just think, Mrs. Shue said, we wouldn't be able to meet at the shoebox. Pastor Hill couldn't preach a sermon, and you wouldn't be able to have family devotions at home. You could even be punished for saying grace before you eat your lunch. But what about other secret rooms? Sammy asked. He didn't see what Christians hiding in the catacombs had to do with Mr. Chambers' hidden bathroom. Mrs. Shue turned to another chapter. Anne Frank's Secret Attic was the title. Who's Anne Frank? Chris asked. Anne Frank, Mrs. Shue said, was a real Jewish girl who lived in the country of Holland in the early 1940s. World War II was being fought with Germany. The Germans thought they were better than everyone else. They especially didn't like the Jews, which is why Anne Frank and her family went into hiding. They hid in secret rooms in a friend's attic for many months before they were found. Then they were sent off to prison camps and eventually killed along with 6 million other Jews. Wow, Dee Dee said softly. That's terrible. But why didn't the Germans like them? Jenny asked. Did they do bad things? The only thing they did, Jenny, Mrs. Shue explained, was to worship differently. But that still doesn't explain Mr. Chambers' secret room, Sammy said. I understand these other reasons for needing secret rooms, but they don't have anything to do with Mill Valley. Mr. Chambers' house was built in the 1870s. Why would he need a secret room? Sammy, I'm really not sure, Mrs. Shue answered. Maybe he does some kind of weird experiments, Maria said. Like making a robot, Chris laughed. He got out of his chair and walked with his hands stretched in front of him. The others laughed. Maybe he robs people and hides the loot in the room, Dee Dee suggested. Yeah, Willie said. When the police come to search his house, they'd never be able to find anything. Pretty sneaky, huh? Maria agreed. Do you suppose he kidnapped someone once and kept him prisoner in there? Maybe he demanded ransom money. He'd be mean enough to do that, Sammy said. The rest of the Shoebox Kids agreed. Then they got very quiet. They suddenly realized Mrs. Shue was staring at all of them with a very sad look on her face. I can't believe what I am hearing, she said slowly. After all our talk about being more like Jesus and how we think about others, how have you come up with these awful ideas about Mr. Chambers? The kids looked from one to the other. "We've always heard older kids tell stories about him," Sammy said quietly. "I guess we just went along without knowing whether any of it was true or not." "I guess you did," Mrs. Shue said. "I don't know much about Mr. Chambers, but I know he contributes quite a lot to various charities in town. Every year, a list of people who have given donations to the local soup kitchen and to the homeless shelter is printed in the paper. I always see Mr. Chambers' name on it." "I have too," Dee Dee agreed. "I even heard Mom and Dad talking after one of their meetings at the shelter about how generous he is. I guess I just ignored what they said." "I also remember Mr. Chambers writing a letter to the paper saying how ramps should be put in all over town to make it easier for handicapped people to get around," Mrs. Shue said. Willie, Jenny, and Sammy looked at each other. They knew this was probably true, too, as they remembered the ramp up to his porch. "It seems to me," Mrs. Shue said, "the evidence strongly suggests that Mr. Chambers is a wonderful, caring person." "I guess he was pretty nice when we sold him the candy bars," Sammy said. Jenny and Willie nodded. "Well then," Mrs. Shue said, "I sure hope you have learned something today. It's too easy to believe untrue things about people, but we must keep ourselves from doing that. We should learn the truth about others instead of relying on what other people say. And Sammy," she continued as she turned to him, "I can't say why there is a hidden room in Mr. Chambers' house, but I do know that many Chinese came to America in the 1800s. They were not liked at all. Perhaps your grandparents could give you some information on the Chinese during that time. It's entirely possible that, since they were so disliked, some of them had to hide out for their own safety."
The story you have heard today is a chapter of the Shoebox Kids, Book 9, The Secret of the Hidden Room, written by Nancy Speck, edited and created by Jerry D. Thomas, and used with permission from the Pacific Press Publishing Association. If you're interested in any other books published by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, please visit AdventistBookCenter.com or call 1-800-765-6955.
This podcast is a production of the Carolina Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.